welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you were here with us today.
Absolutely.
I want you to close your eyes for a second. Unless you were driving, of course.
Right. Please keep your eyes open if you're driving.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
But if you can, I want you to imagine a recurring nightmare. And this isn't just a personal anxiety dream. This is a nightmare that haunted the collective psyche of the entire ancient world.
It really is one of the most universal human stories we have.
It is. Picture the great man or the peerless leader or, the invincible empire that just stretches across the known map. They have absolutely everything.
The wealth, the military might, the technological marvels.
All of it. They are untouchable. But then they reach just a little too high. They step over an invisible, maybe even a cosmic line, and inevitably, catastrophically, they fall.
Usually in the most spectacular way imaginable.
Right. They lose everything.
Yeah.
And it is a story that has been told around desert campfires and staged in ancient stone amphitheaters and meticulously recorded on brittle parchment scrolls.
When you look across the breadth of human history, what is truly fascinating is how entirely different cultures, cultures separated by vast geography and completely different languages, they all managed to diagnose the exact same fatal disease of the human condition.
Yeah.
Even with fundamentally opposed theological worldviews. They saw the same pattern playing out over and over again, even if they prescribed completely different cures for it.
And mapping that pattern is our exact mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at a massive, just an expansive stack of material today.
We really are.
We are pulling from theological papers and dense exegetical analyses of ancient texts and sweeping historical commentary. All of it centered on this ancient recurring pattern of hubris and nemesis.
That is the core theme.
We are going to map the absolute DNA of human arrogance and divine retribution, tracing this from the bloody splintered naval battles of ancient Greece through the poetic warnings of the Hebrew prophets, all the way to a mind-bending absolute plot twist in the New Testament.
The scope of the material we are covering is phenomenal. We will be looking closely at the foundational Greek works, specifically the playwright Aeschylus and the historian Herodotus.
Right.
Then we're going to read those side by side with intense linguistic breakdowns of the Old Testament prophets, specifically looking at Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel.
Some of the most vivid imagery in the ancient world.
Exactly. And finally, we will carry that historical and theological thread straight into the New Testament writings, looking at the apocalyptic visions in Revelation, the letters of James and 1 Peter, and a profound philosophical subversion in Paul's letter to the Philippians.
So you might be asking yourself why you should care about ancient Greek plays and ancient Hebrew grammar.
It is a fair question.
But whether you are currently trying to navigate a complex corporate hierarchy at your job, or observing the shifting sands of global politics on the evening news, or just trying to understand your own human nature and why you do the things you do, this deep dive is going to be incredibly relevant.
It is incredibly applicable today.
Because this material reveals the ancient blueprint for why powerful systems and powerful people inevitably collapse. But more importantly, as we get toward the end of our journey, it shows us how true, enduring elevation is actually achieved.
If we step back and connect this to the bigger picture, this is really a conversation about the fundamental structures of reality.
Yeah.
How does the universe respond to human pride? Is the pushback an impersonal force like gravity, or is it something deeply personal and intentional?
Okay, let's unpack this and jump right in. We are starting our journey in the Mediterranean, stepping directly into the chaotic aftermath of the Greco-Persian Wars.
The historical context here is crucial.
The year is roughly 472 BCE. The Greek city-states have just pulled off what might be one of the greatest miraculous underdog victories in military history against the massive Persian Empire at the naval battle of Salamis.
Against all odds, really.
Just a few years after this victory, a playwright named Aeschylus writes a play called The Persians. It happens to be the earliest surviving Greek tragedy we have on record.
And it is absolutely crucial to understand the personal context of Aeschylus here.
Yeah.
He wasn't just an armchair historian or dramatist sitting safely behind city walls making things up.
Right, he was actually there.
He fought in these wars. He was a veteran of the Battle of Marathon, and the historical record strongly suggests he was present at the naval bloodbath of Salamis itself.
Wow.
He saw the destruction firsthand. So when he sits down to write The Persians, he isn't just writing entertainment. He is diagnosing exactly why the Persian king Xerxes suffered such a catastrophic, humiliating defeat.
He is trying to make sense of it.
Exactly. And his answer completely bypasses military tactics or political miscalculations. He concludes that Xerxes' crime was fundamentally cosmic.
I want to spend some time on what Xerxes actually did, because honestly, it is mind-boggling. Xerxes didn't just want to conquer the landmass of Greece. He seemed to want to conquer the elements themselves.
He wanted to bend nature to his will.
Right. To get his massive army, which ancient historians claimed was so large it drank entire rivers dry across from Asia into Europe, he had to cross the Hellespont.
That is the narrow strait of water dividing the two continents.
Instead of just ferrying people across, which would take too long, he ordered his engineers to build a massive bridge of boats.
An incredible feat of engineering.
They lashed hundreds of ships together with enormous flax and papyrus cables, laid planks across them, and covered it with earth so the animals wouldn't panic. He literally chained the sea together.
The engineering alone is an extraordinary display of power. But in the ancient Greek mind, that act is the ultimate unthinkable transgression.
Because he is messing with the natural order.
Exactly. Xerxes defied the natural boundaries set by the gods. The gods made the sea to separate the land, and Xerxes decided his will was greater than that boundary.
Which brings us to the two core concepts we need to define and really internalize right away. Hubris and Nemesis.
These are foundational.
I hear the word hubris thrown around a lot today in casual conversation. Usually it just means someone is a bit too cocky, or maybe an athlete guarantees a win and then loses. But in the ancient Greek context, it was so much heavier and more dangerous than that, wasn't it?
Infinitely heavier. In modern English, we have diluted the term to mean mere overconfidence. But in the ancient Greek worldview, hubris wasn't just an internal attitude. It was a physical, measurable action.
An action.
Yes, it was the pride that actively, intentionally transgresses divine limits. It is a violent overreach of the human will against the strict, immovable boundaries that the gods have established for mortals.
So when Xerxes bridges the Hellespont, he isn't just showing off.
No, he is acting like a god. He is altering the fabric of the world. He is committing hubris. And the universe, according to the Greek understanding of cosmic equilibrium, simply cannot tolerate that level of imbalance.
Which brings in the second word, nemesis.
Yeah.
Again, today we might say, oh, that competing coffee shop is my nemesis, or we think of a comic book villain.
Right, a rival.
But the ancient definition is a terrifying mechanism.
Nemesis is the inevitable, inescapable retribution. It is the terrible, swift, and entirely just correction that restores the cosmic balance.
How should we picture that?
Think of it like a massive industrial-strength rubber band. The natural state of the rubber band is slack. That is the cosmic balance.
Okay.
Hubris is a human being grabbing that rubber band and pulling it back as far as it can possibly stretch, testing the absolute limits of the material.
And so nemesis would be...
Nemesis isn't a villain. Nemesis is the violent, destructive snap when the tension reaches its breaking point and the rubber band whips back to its original state. Anyone standing in the way of that snap is going to be obliterated.
That's a brilliant way to visualize it. So in Aeschylus's play, the defeat at Salamis, the sinking of the Persian fleet, the slaughter of their men, is the direct mechanical snap of the rubber band.
Exactly. It is the consequence of Xerxes' arrogance.
I remember reading that the ghost of his own father, the former King Darius, actually appears in the play to condemn him for this specific overreach.
He does. Darius's ghost acts as the voice of cosmic reason in the narrative. He explicitly names the bridging of the Hellespont as a sick, delusional act of pride that brought the wrath of the gods down upon the Persian forces.
So Aeschylus puts this on stage as a dramatic tragedy, mostly focusing on the Persians. It is a way for the Greeks to process their victory.
Right.
But then, a generation later, roughly around the 430s BCE, a man named Herodotus enters the picture. He's widely known as the father of history.
A monumental figure.
And he takes Aeschylus's specific dramatic concept about the Persians and expands it into a universal theory of how human history actually works for everyone.
Yes. Herodotus takes the case study of Xerxes and identifies a fatal recurring cycle. He observes that this isn't just a Persian problem, it is a human inevitability.
He outlines this fatal cycle in 4 very distinct stages, doesn't he?
He does. The cycle always begins with prosperity, which in the Greek is called choros. This isn't just doing well, this is extreme wealth. You have too much success, too much power, and you reach a state of absolute satiety.
It's like a modern tech startup that starts out hungry and innovative, but then they achieve a total global monopoly. They have more money than they know what to do with. They get deeply comfortable. They get satiated.
Precisely. And that chorus, that unnatural level of satiety, inevitably ferments and breeds the second stage, which is hubris.
The arrogance sets in.
Because you have never failed, you start thinking you are inherently incapable of failing. You become untouchable. You stop listening to advisors. You start believing your own myth.
And this hubris then breeds the third incredibly dangerous stage, which is 8.
Yes, 8.
How does 8 manifest? What does that look like?
8 translates roughly to folly ruin, or a kind of divine blindness. It is a psychological delusion. When you are in the grip of 8, you lose your grip on reality. You make stupid, profoundly irrational decisions.
Can you give us an example?
Well, to give you a historical example directly from the Persian Wars. When Xerxes first tried to build that bridge across the Hellespont, a massive storm blew in and destroyed the cables, smashing the boats.
A pretty normal weather event.
A rational general would recognize the weather as a military variable. But Xerxes, deep in the delusion of 8, ordered his men to literally take whips and give the ocean 300 lashes.
He whipped the ocean.
Oh, he did. He also ordered them to throw a pair of iron fetters into the water to chain it, and he had the engineers who built the first bridge beheaded.
It sounds completely comical, like something a toddler would do in a bathtub, until you realize the terrifying scale of the delusion behind it. A man who commands millions of troops genuinely believes he can punish a body of water for insubordination.
It is the ultimate manifestation of delusion, and that folly, that absolute detachment from reality caused by 8 finally and inevitably invites the fourth stage,
Which is surprises or nemesis.
retribution, the snap of the rubber band. But Herodotus adds a fascinating theological layer to this. He notes that this retribution is driven by a concept called divine phonos.
Let's break down phonos. I know it relates to jealousy, but how does it work in this specific cycle?
Phonos essentially means divine envy or jealousy. The Greek gods of the pantheon were incredibly protective of their own status.
They weren't exactly warm and fuzzy.
No, they were not unconditionally loving creators. They were powerful beings constantly guarding their territory. If a mortal gets too prosperous, too powerful, or if their proverbial tree grows too tall, the gods perceive it as a threat.
They get envious.
They actively cut the mortal down to size simply to maintain the cosmic hierarchy.
I see. So it's not even necessarily that the mortal committed a moral sin like murder or theft. Their mere existence at that height offends the gods.
Exactly. Herodotus quotes a character in his histories who explicitly says that the gods love to strike down the tallest trees and the highest houses with lightning, while the small ones are left alone.
Because the gods will not allow anyone to be arrogant but themselves.
Precisely.
Now, if Aeschylus was just writing a play about the defeated enemy, how did Herodotus' cycle become such a widespread worldview? I mean, who is Herodotus actually warning when he writes this universal history?
That is the pivotal question. You have to look at the political climate when Herodotus was writing in the 430s BCE. The Persian threat had receded, but a new empire had risen.
The Athenian Empire.
Yes. Following their victories, Athens grew massively in naval power, wealth, and cultural dominance. They formed the Delian League, which essentially became an Athenian extortion racket over the other Greek city-states.
They were the new top dogs.
So by taking Aeschylus's critique of Persia and universalizing it into this cycle of chorus to hubris to 8 to nemesis, Herodotus is heavily, undeniably implying that the victorious Greeks are not immune.
He is holding up a mirror.
He is holding up a historical mirror to Athens and warning them. Look at Xerxes. Look at what happened to the greatest empire on earth. If you let your prosperity turn into arrogance, the gods will feel Thonos. The rubber band will snap. You'll be cut down just like they were.
It's like he's describing an impersonal cosmic alarm system. You step over the line, the laser beam breaks, the alarms go off, and the trapdoor opens. The gods don't even have to personally hate you. It's just the mechanics of the universe maintaining its own equilibrium.
That is a perfect summation of the Greek worldview. It is a mechanical, cyclical, almost mathematical balance.
So keeping that mechanical alarm system in mind, what happens when we shift our gaze geographically and theologically? We are going to travel east from the Mediterranean and dive into the ancient Near East.
A completely different paradigm.
Specifically looking at the Hebrew prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Obadiah. These prophets were looking at the massive warring nations surrounding the tiny, vulnerable kingdom of Judah. They were diagnosing the exact same human disease of towering arrogance.
But they were doing it from a radically fundamentally different worldview.
The contrast is staggering when you put them side by side.
It is. The Hebrew prophets operated within a strictly monotheistic and covenantal framework. They believed in one sovereign creator God, YHWH. They weren't reading Aeschylus. They weren't attending Greek tragedies.
Right, they were completely separate.
Yet they observed the exact same geopolitical pattern. Human empires reach a terrifying height and then they completely collapse. But the prophets sharpened this hubris nemesis pattern into something much more precise, much more personal, and frankly, much more demanding.
Let's start with the prophet Jeremiah to see how this works. Jeremiah lived through the agonizing decline and eventual destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians.
A very dark historical period.
He has an entire massive section of his book, chapters 46 through 51, dedicated entirely to what scholars call oracles against the nations.
He looks around the geopolitical chessboard and prophesies against Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Edom, Ammon, and finally Babylon itself.
And when he gets to the oracle against the nation of Moab in chapter 48, the text becomes completely obsessed with this concept of pride.
The lexical intensity in the original Hebrew text of Jeremiah 48 verses 29 and 30 is truly remarkable. The writer doesn't just mention pride in passing, he piles synonym upon synonym upon synonym to describe Moab's arrogance.
Almost like he is building an airtight legal case.
Exactly. Let's look at the words used. First, we have gan, which refers to majesty or exaltation that has turned toxic and self-serving. Then we have gay, which simply means proud. Then gabho, which denotes physical or metaphorical loftiness. Then gawa, meaning sheer arrogance. And finally, rum-leb, which translates literally to a haughtiness or highness of heart.
It's almost like Jeremiah is running out of breath just stammering to describe the sheer density of how arrogant Moab has become. We have heard of Moab's pride. He is exceedingly proud. His loftiness, his pride, his arrogance, the haughtiness of his heart. When you read it, it feels almost repetitive. Why use all these overlapping words?
Linguistic analysis of the Hebrew text reveals that this repetition isn't just poetic flair or a lack of vocabulary. Pride functions as the absolute causal pivot in Jeremiah's rhetorical argument.
The focal point of the crime.
Yes, by foregrounding the offense with all these different synonyms, he is establishing the magnitude of the crime. Therefore, the judgment, the nemesis, that immediately follows lands with full logical, theological, and rhetorical weight.
Moab's absolute destruction isn't a random geopolitical accident.
It is strictly required because of this intense, concentrated, multifaceted arrogance.
We see this exact same dynamic playing out in the prophet Obadiah and also in Jeremiah chapter 49 regarding the nation of Edom.
That's a fascinating example.
I love this example because it grounds the abstract idea of pride into actual geography. Edom was located in an incredibly mountainous, rocky region. Think of the famous city of Petra carved directly into the cliff faces.
They felt completely militarily secure.
And the text says to Edom, "The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock." Wait, how does a geographical location make you arrogant?
It is a brilliant psychological insight by the prophets. Edom's physical geographical security literally morphed into spiritual and fatal arrogance.
Because they were so high up.
Because their capital was nearly impossible to invade by a traditional marching army, they started to believe they were entirely untouchable. They looked at their impenetrable rock walls and thought, no one can bring us down to the ground. Their natural defenses created a false sense of autonomy.
They thought they had engineered their way out of the human condition.
Precisely. And here is where the deep grammar of the Hebrew text becomes incredibly illuminating. When the prophets pronounce the coming judgment, the destruction of these untouchable nations, they use specific Hebrew verb forms known as cotal verbs.
Okay, let's pause and unpack that. What exactly is a cotal verb, and why does it matter to you listening at home?
So, in biblical Hebrew, the verbal system doesn't operate exactly like English past, present, and future tenses. It often focuses on the state of the action. A cotal verb form, also known as the perfect tense, often represents a completed, finished action.
So like something that has already happened.
Right. Now, here is the profound part. When the prophets use a cotal verb to describe a future judgment that hasn't happened yet, it carries the force of absolute prophetic certainty.
Wow.
It is not merely a forecast. It is not a weatherman saying, I think there's a 70% chance it might rain tomorrow. It is a judge slamming a gavel and announcing the sentence.
It is final.
In the mind of God, the judgment is so certain, so inevitable, that grammatically it is spoken of as an accomplished verdict. It is a done deal.
That is wild. So when God says Edom will be brought down from the rocks, the caudal verb, Makes it as certain as if the cliff faces were already crumbling and the ruins were already smoking, even while Edom is still sitting up there feeling perfectly safe.
Exactly. The grammar conveys the absolute certainty of the nemesis.
But I want to clarify the major theological shift happening here.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about the Greeks, how they saw hubris as tripping an impersonal cosmic alarm system, and how the gods felt envious or thonos. The Hebrew prophets saw the mechanics of pride completely differently, right?
Fundamentally differently. For Jeremiah, Obadiah, and the other biblical prophets, pride is not simply the transgression of an impersonal cosmic speed limit, and it has absolutely nothing to do with divine thonos or petty envy.
Because God isn't threatened.
Right, YHWH is not threatened by human power. He is the sovereign creator. Therefore, pride is a deeply personal, relational, and theological rebellion.
It changes everything.
It is the active, intentional rejection of God's sovereign claim over his creation. When a nation like Moab or Edom exalts itself, they are essentially saying, we are gods unto ourselves. We dictate our own reality. We do not answer to the Creator.
And because it is a deeply personal theological rebellion, it demands a deeply personal theological response.
It does.
That raises the stakes entirely. It's not a law of physics snapping back like our rebel band analogy. It's a personal affront to the creator of the universe.
A direct challenge to his authority.
We see this dynamic beautifully and terrifyingly illustrated in the book of Isaiah, specifically in chapter 2. The historical text highlights this concept of the day of YHWH.
A major prophetic theme.
In the first 5 verses of chapter 2, Isaiah paints this gorgeous, idyllic picture. He describes all the nations of the earth streaming peacefully up to God's holy mountain, beating their swords into plowshares and learning his ways. It sounds like a perfect utopia.
It does, but then there was a jarring pivot. Verses 6 through 22 act as a dark, terrifying mirror image to that opening vision.
The tone shifts completely.
Instead of streaming to God's mountain in peace, those exact same nations are now depicted as utterly terrified. They are throwing away their idols of silver and gold to the moles and the bats. They are running and hiding in the jagged rocks and caves to escape from the terror of YHWH and the splendor of his majesty.
Why the sudden terror?
The text is explicit. Because of their pride.
I noticed reading through the Isaiah passage that the writer repeats an almost identical phrase in verse 11 and again in verse 17. It says, "The haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of man shall be brought low." Why do they bracket the text like that, repeating the same idea at the beginning and the end of the thought?
That is a wonderful observation. What you are noticing is a specific literary device called an inclusio.
An inclusio, what does that do functionally in the text?
Think of an inclusio as a pair of literary bookends. An ancient author will start a passage and end a passage with the exact same phrase or concept to bracket the entire thought. It signals to the reader everything inside these brackets is about this one central theme.
So it frames the narrative.
In Isaiah 2, verse 11 and verse 17 serve as this inclusio. The text emphatically declares that human haughtiness will be bowed down and human loftiness will be brought low. But the crucial part of the inclusio is the purpose clause that follows, so that YHWH alone will be exalted in that day.
YHWH alone. So it's an issue of exclusive glory.
Precisely. And it is worth noting that the Hebrew verbs used in those verses for humbled and brought low are in the passive voice, but they carry a strong emphasis on divine personal action.
So God isn't just watching it happen.
God does not merely step back, cross his arms, and allow human pride to naturally collapse under its own unsustainable weight like a poorly built tower. He actively steps into human history to dismantle it. The hubris nemesis pattern here is driven by the holy personal God clearing the stage of all human pretense so that he alone remains standing.
Okay, this brings us to one of the most vivid sections of our research. We are moving from Isaiah and Jeremiah over to the prophet Ezekiel,
where things get really cinematic.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If Jeremiah used an avalanche of vocabulary words to describe pride, Ezekiel uses vivid, cinematic, almost blockbuster-level imagery. He doesn't just give you words. He paints these massive, towering metaphors.
He uses gigantic trees and terrifying mythological figures to represent these arrogant political superpowers.
Ezekiel is arguably the absolute master of the extended metaphor in the biblical corpus.
To understand his imagery, we have to look at his context. Ezekiel is prophesying from exile. He is living among the Jewish captives in Babylon right around 587 BCE, watching the geopolitical tectonic plates shifting around him.
He's seen empires clash in real time.
Let's look closely at Ezekiel chapter 31. He is tasked with delivering a prophetic oracle directed right at the Pharaoh of Egypt, warning him of his impending doom. but he does it indirectly by telling a sprawling cautionary tale about a completely different empire, Assyria.
And he describes Assyria as this massive, beautiful cedar of Lebanon. Now, why a cedar? The imagery is just incredible. He describes this tree as so perfectly nourished by deep waters that it grows taller than all the other trees.
Its top reaches thick into the clouds.
Its boughs are so wide it provides shade for all the nations of the earth. He even says that the trees in the Garden of Eden, the divine garden itself, were jealous of how beautiful this cedar was.
The cedar of Lebanon was famous in the ancient Near East for its strength, its massive size, and its high-quality timber. It was the material used to build palaces and temples.
A status symbol.
By using the cedar, Ezekiel is tapping into a widespread ancient motif of the cosmic tree, a mythological tree that stands at the center of the world, connecting heaven and earth, providing order and shelter.
So it's not just a big tree, it's the center of the universe to them.
It is the ultimate picture of imperial splendor, unparalleled height, and supreme political confidence. Assyria genuinely believed it was the cosmic tree holding the world together.
But then the nemesis comes. The tree is cut down. And the text provides an explicit causal link for why it happens.
It does, and the grammar is precise. The Hebrew word yan, which translates to because, serves as the structural pivot of the entire chapter. Because the tree was exalted in its height, because its top reached the clouds, and because its heart was proud of its height, therefore YHWH handed it over to a foreign ruler to be ruthlessly chopped down.
That is the ultimate irony. The very height that made the tree so glorious, the very thing that made it the envy of the world, is the exact specific reason it gets the axe.
Yes. The syntactical structure in the Hebrew text literally mirrors the logical chain of the Greek hubris and nemesis cycle, but with divine agency. Height equals pride, and pride equals the axe.
And the imagery of the fall is brutal, isn't it?
It is severe. The text says foreigners cut it down, its massive trunk is left abandoned on the mountains, and its broken branches fill all the valleys and ravines. The shade is gone, and the nations that lived under it scatter.
It is a severe, highly illustrative warning directly to the Pharaoh of Egypt. Do not trust in your own military power or your geopolitical height. Look at what happened to the great cedar of Assyria. The axe is already swinging. You are next.
And Ezekiel does something similar, playing with these arboreal metaphors back in chapter 17, but with a fascinating twist.
Yes, the eagle and the vine.
He uses a political allegory involving a great eagle, a cedar tree, and a vine. It's essentially a critique of Zedekiah, the final tragic king of Judah.
Zedekiah broke his solemn covenant with Babylon and tried to make an arrogant backdoor alliance with Egypt to save himself.
Right. Zedekiah thought he could outsmart the geopolitical realities through a prideful alliance. He thought he could pull the strings. The result is that the vine withers completely when the east wind hits it.
The nemesis falls squarely on Judah's king. He is captured, blinded, and taken to Babylon.
But what is truly fascinating here, and what sets the biblical prophets apart from the Greek tragedians, is that chapter 17 ends completely differently than the oracle of total destruction against Egypt in chapter 31.
It ends with hope.
Chapter 17 ends with a surprising messianic hope.
Right. After all the destruction, YHWH himself steps in and says he is going to take a tiny, tender shoot from the very top of the cedar and plant it himself on a high mountain in Israel.
And that little shoot will grow into a noble cedar bearing fruit and providing shelter for birds of every kind.
So even in the midst of crushing nemesis, there is this tiny, deliberate seed of redemptive hope. The cycle of human arrogance and destruction is relentless, but it can be broken not by human effort, but by God himself intervening and planting a true, faithful, humble king.
But before we get to the ultimate resolution of that hope, we have to look at one more example from Ezekiel, because it might be the most extreme example of hubris in the entire Old Testament.
I am talking about Ezekiel chapter 28. This is a lament over the king of Tyre.
A fascinating text.
Now, for context, Tyre was an incredibly wealthy, powerful maritime trading empire. They were built on an island. They controlled the Mediterranean trade routes, and they were famous for producing this incredibly expensive purple dye.
They were the billionaires of the ancient world.
And the imagery Ezekiel uses in chapter 28 is some of the most dramatic, vivid, and hotly debated in the entire prophetic corpus.
Ezekiel is addressing the historical, literal king of Tyre, but he uses language that elevates the king's hubris to a cosmic, almost mythological level.
Listen to how he describes him. He says the king was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty.
And he doesn't just say he lived in a nice palace. He places him in Eden, the garden of God.
He says he was adorned with every precious stone, ruby, topaz, emerald. He calls him an anointed guardian cherub. This isn't just a rich guy sitting on a throne counting gold coins. The text is portraying him with the majesty and status of a divine being.
Now, it is important to note impartially that when you read the scholarly literature on this passage, there is significant debate about this extreme imagery.
What are the different views?
The primary textual focus is undeniably the historical human king of Tyre. His immense wealth, his naval fleet, and his impenetrable island fortress made him genuinely think he was a god sitting in the seat of the gods.
But some see more than just the human king, right?
Yes. However, many interpreters across history, particularly conservative evangelical scholars, see a secondary typology occurring here. They see a double reference that uses the king's pride as an echo or a reflection of the primordial fall of Satan himself.
We want to be clear. We aren't endorsing one specific theological interpretation over another, but just reporting the debate in the source material.
Exactly. Regardless of where one lands in that specific theological debate, the central thesis of the text remains perfectly intact. It is the ultimate anatomy of hubris.
Exactly, because look at what the text says caused the fall. It tells the king, your heart became proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom on account of your splendor.
It's the ultimate narcissism.
His own perfection, his own wealth became a mirror he couldn't stop staring into. He became so obsessed with his own reflection that it blinded him to his actual status as a created being.
And notice the exact Hebrew syntax of the nemesis that follows. YHWH speaks directly and says, I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings.
I cast you.
Yes, I cast you. The agent of the nemesis is not an impersonal balancing of the cosmic scales. It is not a tragic inevitability. It is the personal sovereign God actively vindicating his own holiness against a creature that attempted to usurp his throne.
This material is just so heavy. When you step back and look at the trajectory we've covered, from Xerxes literally whipping the sea to bend it to his will, to Moab's towering multi-layered pride, to the king of Tyre deceiving himself into thinking he's a guardian cherub in Eden.
The higher they climb, the harder they fall.
The rubber band snaps back with devastating force every single time. But we haven't even reached the climax yet. I want to transition us out of the Old Testament and fast forward into the New Testament.
To the ultimate eschatological climax of this entire biblical tradition.
The book of Revelation, specifically chapters 17 and 18, the fall of Babylon.
To fully grasp the weight of these chapters, we need to set the historical scene. The book of Revelation was written by the Apostle John during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian, roughly around 95 to 96 CE.
A very dangerous time to be a Christian.
The early Christian church was facing intense localized persecution. More than just physical threat, they were facing immense economic compromise and cultural pressure to participate in the imperial cult.
To declare that Caesar is Lord, to worship the emperor.
Exactly. In the midst of this pressure cooker, John is given this apocalyptic vision, and he is shown the ultimate fall of an entity he calls Babylon.
But just to be clear, he isn't talking about the historical city of Babylon in ancient Mesopotamia. That city was long gone. This Babylon is a symbolic personification.
And John describes her in incredibly visceral terms. She is depicted as a great prostitute draped in purple and scarlet clothing, glittering with gold and pearls.
She is seated on many waters, meaning she influences many nations, and she is holding a golden cup. But the terrifying part is that the text says she is drunk on the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus.
Yes, Babylon here personifies the ultimate concentrated satanic world system. It is the culmination of every imperial economic and religious power that operates in opposition to God.
In John's immediate historical context, Babylon was absolutely Rome.
But the symbol transcends Rome. It applies to every arrogant superpower throughout history that demands the absolute allegiance and worship that belongs exclusively to the Creator.
And the hubris of this Babylon reaches its absolute literary zenith in Revelation chapter 18, verse 7.
The grammar of hubris.
I love the breakdown of this verse.
Okay.
Let's look closely at Babylon's boast. She says in her heart, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and I will never see mourning. It's so short, but so incredibly arrogant.
It truly is the grammar of hubris at its most absolute and defiant. When we look at the Greek text, the verb used for, she says, is lege. It is in the present tense.
Why does the present tense matter there?
This is a crucial grammatical detail. This isn't just something she mumbled under her breath once on a good day. The present tense in Greek captures an ongoing, continuous, habitual character.
So it's her constant state of mind.
Her arrogance is so deeply entrenched, so woven into her DNA, that it has become her defining identity. She sits on her throne, continuously repeating this mantra of self-sufficiency.
Furthermore, she uses an emphatic double negative in the Greek ou me I do, which translates to I will never ever see morning.
It is the ultimate blinding delusion. She looks at her wealth, her military, her trade routes, and she genuinely thinks she has permanently conquered the cycle of history.
She thinks she is literally untouchable. She has reached the highest peak of Herodotus' cycle and convinced herself she can just stay there forever.
And because the hubris is so absolute, the nemesis that follows is designed for maximum shock value.
It is. After centuries of historical buildup across all these empires we've discussed, Assyria, Babylon, Tyre, Rome, apocalyptic Babylon's destruction doesn't take decades of slow, agonizing decline.
The text repeats over and over again, emphasizing the terrifying speed of the judgment.
It says her judgment comes in one day and in 1 hour. Revelation 18, verse 8 explicitly says, therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her death, mourning and famine. She will be consumed by fire.
The suddenness is what makes it so terrifying. An empire that took centuries to build an economy that controls the entire known world.
The stock market crashes, the city burns, the empire is entirely wiped off the map. In 60 minutes, the snap of the rubber band is instantaneous.
And the historical analysis notes how masterfully John echoes the Old Testament prophets we just talked about to describe this fallout.
He weaves the Old Testament texts together brilliantly.
In Revelation 18, following the destruction, there's a threefold lamentation. The kings of the earth who committed adultery with her, the merchants who grew filthy rich off her excessive luxury, and the seafarers and ship captains who transported her goods across the Mediterranean.
They all stand far off, terrified by the intense heat and the smoke of her burning.
And they all cry out the exact same phrase, woe, woe, O great city.
This directly intentionally echoes the laments over historical Babylon found in Jeremiah 50 and 51, and the lament over the seafaring empire of Tyre in Ezekiel 27.
John is showing us the climax of the exact same pattern. Overweening, blinding pride meeting sudden, total, and irreversible divine reversal.
So bringing this back to you listening, why does the fiery fall of an apocalyptic city matter to us today?
It matters deeply because of the contrasting outcome that immediately follows. Babylon's self-adorned purple and scarlet, all her exploited wealth, all her towering arrogance, literally ends in a pile of smoking ash.
It becomes a desolate haunt for demons.
But turn the page to Revelation chapter 19, and the text immediately pivots to a completely different scene. The smoke clears, and we see the bride of the Lamb.
And pay attention to what she is wearing. She is not draped in stolen gold, precious stones, or imperial purple. She is clothed in fine linen, bright and pure.
And the text explicitly interprets the clothing for us. It says the fine linen stands for the righteous deeds of the saints.
The contrast is breathtaking. She didn't buy those clothes with exploited wealth. She didn't seize them by force. They were granted to her.
Exactly. The theological contrast is unmistakable and final. Babylon's boast ends in a smoking crater. The humility and patient endurance of the persecuted saints ends in a joyous marriage supper.
What Aeschylus staged as a tragic play on a stage, and what Herodotus analyzed as a cyclical pattern of human history revelation, presents as the final, irreversible judgment of reality.
It is the definitive nemesis that permanently closes the present evil age and opens the door to the new creation.
Okay, let's take a breath. Let's let that settle for a moment, because that was incredibly heavy. Up until this point in our deep dive across both ancient Greek history and the sweeping narratives of the Old Testament, the pattern has been overwhelmingly, relentlessly destructive.
Pride leads to the axe. Pride leads to fire. Hubris inevitably leads to death.
But here's where the New Testament introduces a massive radical plot twist.
Yes, the New Testament takes this entire terrifying centuries-old tradition of hubris and nemesis and transposes it into a completely new life-giving key.
We see this mechanical shift most clearly in the letters of James and 1 Peter. In James chapter 4, verse 6, and 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5, both of these early church leaders quote the exact same verse.
They pull it from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament book of Proverbs, specifically Proverbs 3, verse 34.
The verse is, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now, I know I've heard that verse a million times. It's the kind of thing you see printed on a coffee mug or a bumper sticker.
It's very common.
But when you place it in the context of everything we've talked about today, Xerxes, Tyre, Babylon, that little sentence is earth-shattering. Let's look at the grammar again to really understand why. Let's look at that word opposes.
The Greek verb used there by both James and Peter is antitacetai. It is parsed as a present middle indicative verb.
Okay, walk us through the present middle indicative. How does that grammatical structure actually change the way we picture God acting?
The present tense means it is an ongoing, continuous, habitual action. It establishes a timeless, unbreakable principle of the universe. This is simply how God operates at all times in all eras.
But the middle voice is where it gets fascinating, right?
Yes, the middle voice carries the force of deep personal involvement and reflexivity. It means the subject is intimately engaged in the action.
So antitacitai does not mean God set up a mechanical booby trap of karma, went to sleep, and you accidentally tripped the wire.
Exactly, not at all. It means God actively, personally, and continuously sets himself in battle array against the arrogant. He resists them. He braces himself against their forward movement. He acts as an unmovable wall against their pride.
If you are walking in pride, the sovereign God of the universe is actively pushing back against you. You were trying to move forward, and God himself has his hand on your chest stopping you. That is a terrifying thought.
It is sobering.
But then we get the second half of the verse.
Yeah.
But gives grace to the humble.
And right there is the plot twist of human history. This introduces a category that the ancient Greek world simply did not possess.
Right. Think about it in Aeschylus. If you commit hubris, the best you can hope for is catharsis. You get to feel deeply sad and purified by the tragedy of it all, but you still lose your fleet.
In Herodotus, there is no escape. You just get trapped in this endless, exhausting, historical washing machine of rising and falling.
Even in the Hebrew prophets, the focus is so heavily weighted on the catastrophic judgments that level the wicked nations.
But here the New Testament opens a third entirely new way out. The word is charis, grace. You do not have to be crushed by the cycle.
If you voluntarily humble yourself, God doesn't just cancel the nemesis and leave you alone in the dirt. He actively gives you unmerited favor. He reaches down and provides the exaltation himself.
We see this incredible inversion sung so beautifully in the Gospel of Luke. In Luke chapter 1, we have what is traditionally called the Magnificat.
It is the spontaneous song of Mary, a young, poor, obscure teenage girl when she finds out she has been chosen to carry the Messiah.
Mary's song is nothing less than the ancient Hubris Nemesis pattern sung in the joyful key of the New Covenant. Listen to the lyrics. She sings, "He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones."
That is the classic expected nemesis. That is the axe falling on the tall trees.
But then she adds the twist. And he has exalted those of humble estate. He has filled the hungry with good things and the rich. He has sent empty away. God's power isn't just destructive to the proud. It is actively, gently elevating to the lowly.
So we arrive at the ultimate question. What does this all mean for us? How do we actually live this out in a world that still operates like Babylon?
This brings our deep dive to its absolute ethical and theological center.
We are going to look at the Apostle Paul's letter to the Philippians. Specifically, we're going to walk through Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11.
To understand the weight of these words, picture Paul's situation. He is writing this letter from a Roman prison cell, likely physically chained to an imperial guard.
He is writing to a church in Philippi that he deeply loves. But Philippi was a Roman colony, a city deeply obsessed with status, honor, and public reputation.
The church there was facing external suffering, but more dangerously, they were facing internal bickering and selfish ambition.
To combat this, Paul gives them what scholars universally refer to as the Christ hymn.
And this text, arguably more than any other in the Bible, utterly subverts and breaks the logic of the ancient Hubris Nemesis cycle.
It takes the machine, unplugs it, and dismantles it.
It truly does. Paul starts this section with a direct imperative command to the church. Have this mindset among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. He is setting up Jesus not just as a savior, but as the ultimate definitive paradigm for human behavior.
And the contrast with every ancient example we've discussed today is breathtaking. Think back through our journey. Xerxes grasped at more than was his trying to conquer the sea and was defeated.
The king of Tyre leveraged his beauty and wisdom into a delusional claim to be a god and was cast down.
Apocalyptic Babylon declared herself an untouchable queen and burned in an hour. Every single one of them reached up, grasped for divinity, and was violently thrown down.
But Christ actually possessed equality with God. He didn't have to grasp for it. He didn't have to conquer a nation or build a tower to get it. He already inherently had it.
Exactly. The text reads, "Who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped."
The Greek term used there for grasp is harpagmos. It is a fascinating word. It means a thing to be violently seized, held onto by force, or exploited for one's own selfish advantage.
So Christ actively refused hubris.
He had the ultimate supreme status in the universe, and he flatly refused to use it as a platform for self-exaltation or self-protection.
Instead, he does the exact unimaginable opposite. We enter into what theologians call the kenosis, the self-emptying.
The hymn outlines this incredible descent using a rapid-fire series of decisive actions captured in the Greek text by aorist verbs. Aorist verbs indicate completed, perfective, definitive acts.
He emptied himself. He took the form of a servant. He was born in the likeness of men.
He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even the excruciating, humiliating death on a Roman cross.
This is the mind-blowing contrast of the entire deep dive. The Greek tragic hero like Xerxes is brought low by forces outside himself. He commits hubris, the gods get jealous, and the rubber band of Nemesis tackles him to the ground violently and completely against his will.
But Christ voluntarily humbled himself. No one forced him down. He chose the descent.
And because the humbling was entirely voluntary, motivated by love and obedience rather than pride, the reversal that follows is not a violent nemesis, but supreme, unprecedented grace and exaltation.
The text pivots on one crucial word, therefore. Because he descended, therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth.
The ultimate exaltation.
Huh.
But it didn't come through pride. It didn't come through military conquest or bridging the sea. It came through perfect, voluntary humility.
If we synthesize this entire journey and apply it to daily life, the implications are staggering. For the Christian worldview, pride isn't just an annoying psychological flaw.
It isn't just a bad habit that makes you unpleasant at parties.
Pride is a fundamental theological contradiction. Pride is a blatant refusal to adopt the defining pattern of the incarnate Son of God.
If you are following Jesus, and yet you are ruthlessly clawing your way up the corporate ladders, stepping on your colleagues to get your personal brand noticed, constantly grasping for your own glory and defending your own status, you are living in direct, active opposition to the pattern of your Savior.
You are acting like Babylon while claiming to follow the Lamb.
True, enduring exaltation does not come from grasping, clawing, or defending your height. It comes from a generous God responding to an open, dependent, and humble heart.
The grace promised in James 4, God giving grace to the humble, is not a gold star given out for acting modest. It is the characteristic, joyful response of the Creator to a human being who finally realizes their absolute dependence on him.
Humility before the God of grace does not merely survive the wreckage of falling empires. As the text shows us, humility inherits the new creation.
It is a profound, life-altering trajectory. It moves us from the terrifying inevitability of destruction to the beautiful possibility of grace-fueled exaltation.
Okay, let's recap this massive sweeping journey we've just taken you on. We started in the bloody churning waters of the Hellespont and Salamis, looking at the cosmic mechanical balance of Greek tragedy and Herodotus' history.
We saw how the excess of Koros inevitably leads to the blinding arrogance of hubris, and how that hubris demands the violent snap of Nemesis.
Then we shifted our gaze to the Hebrew prophets. We heard the lexical avalanche of Jeremiah condemning the multi-layered pride of Moab and the geographical arrogance of Edom.
We saw Ezekiel's towering cedar of Assyria cut down, and the mythological king of Tyre cast from the mountain of God for staring too long at his own beauty. We learned that pride is not just a cosmic mistake, it is a direct personal rebellion against the sovereignty of the Creator.
We fast-forwarded to the smoking sudden ruins of eschatological Babylon in the book of Revelation, where the ultimate global system of human arrogance is wiped out in a single hour.
But then we found the plot twist. The New Testament reveals that God actively resists the proud, but he offers the third way out, grace to the humble.
And finally, we arrived at the quiet, voluntary self-emptying of Jesus Christ in Philippians 2. A Savior who inherently possessed equality with God, but refused to grasp at it. Instead, he chose the descent, choosing the cross, fundamentally rewriting the rules of the universe and turning the ancient hubris nemesis cycle completely upside down.
The ultimate subversion.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. We spent all this time looking at how ancient empires, kings, and systems inevitably collapse under the weight of their own arrogance.
But consider our own modern context.
Exactly. I want you to think about our world today. Think about the massive institutions we interact with daily. Think about the untouchable tech giants that control our data and communication. Think about the global superpowers flexing their military might.
Or even think about the prevailing cultural mindsets that constantly demand we build our own personal brands, heavily curate our image, and constantly exalt ourselves on social media.
Imagine if Herodotus and the prophet Jeremiah were sitting together in a coffee shop analyzing our modern society right now. Where would they say we are in this cycle? Are we just enjoying the prosperity? Are we drunk on the Koros, the absolute satiety of our wealth, convenience, and technology?
Or have we already blindly crossed the Hellespont into the deep hubris that guarantees the fall?
But more importantly, bring it down to a personal level. In a world that is absolutely obsessed with grasping for the top, fighting for status, and protecting our pride, what would it look like for you to radically intentionally choose the descent this week?
What does it look like in your office, in your family, to empty yourself, to serve the people around you, and to truly trust that exaltation is God's job, not yours?
That is the ultimate lingering question this text leaves us with. When faced with power, will we grasp like empires or will we empty ourselves like Christ? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We absolutely love exploring these massive foundational ideas with you. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Take care, everyone.